from Washington, D.C.
From Bloomberg's Washington, D.C. studios to our TV and radio audiences worldwide, welcome to Balance of Power. I'm Joe Matthew in Washington tonight. The White House handles the message around the Venezuelan boat strikes.
President Trump and Secretary Hasset have made it clear that presidentially designated narco-terrorist groups are subject to lethal targeting in accordance with the laws of war.
What the administration is saying after it confirmed the U.S. military ordered a second strike against a suspected drug trafficking vessel in the Caribbean back in September, while insisting it was lawful. The national security meeting the president is holding right now. Why one former general says the strike looks like a war crime. And the congressional probes now underway when House Foreign Affairs Committee member Congressman Tim Burchett joins us up ahead. Plus, the U.S. and Ukrainian negotiators say they had productive discussions about a framework for a peace deal, but with no final word on what happens next, the president dispatching Special Envoy Steve Witkoff to Moscow for talks. We'll discuss with retired Lieutenant Colonel Alexander Vindman about the state of negotiations up ahead. Also tonight, decision made. The president announcing a Federal Reserve chair to replace Jay Powell has been chosen. What that pick says about the president's long-term plan for the Fed and how markets reacted, all coming up. And the special election tomorrow that's getting national attention. The congressional race in Tennessee that could shrink Republicans' razor-thin majority in the House as Democrats look to extend November's blue wave even further. But we begin this evening with the Oval Office meeting that should be getting underway right now. The president speaking with his national security team, as confirmed by White House Press Secretary Caroline Leavitt just a short time ago. These discussions undoubtedly, though not confirmed, to be focused around the ongoing confrontation with Venezuela, the so-called narco-terrorists, as the administration has deemed them. The White House today confirming and defending the strikes that we have seen take place, including one in which a boat was struck not once but twice, killing all on board. Take a listen.
President Trump and Secretary Hasset have made it clear that presidentially designated narco-terrorist groups are subject to lethal targeting in accordance with the laws of war. With respect to the strikes in question on September 2nd, Secretary Hasset authorized Admiral Bradley to conduct these kinetic strikes. Admiral Bradley worked well within his authority and the law, directing the engagement to ensure the boat was destroyed and the threat to the United States of America was eliminated.
For the latest on all of this and the kill everyone order that Pete Hegseth reportedly delivered, we turn to Bloomberg's Kate Sullivan, who joins us live from the White House. She's on the North Lawn this evening with some big questions, Kate, about this meeting that's happening inside that building. Who's at the table and what do they plan to do?
That's right. So this meeting is coming as the administration is really ramping up its pressure campaign against Venezuela. So the president is actually meeting right now with several key members of his cabinet, including Pete Hegseth and Marco Rubio, and also other members of his national security team. We were expecting that meeting to start at 5 p.m. and to really focus on the next steps here when it comes to Venezuela. You know, this is as the administration has been facing more and more questions about the legality of these strikes that it's been carrying out against alleged drug boats off the coast of Venezuela. Those strikes have killed more than 80 people at this point. And the White House press briefing today, the main question really focused on one of those strikes in particular. This is after the Washington Post reported that Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth gave a verbal order to kill everybody aboard these strikes, which led to a military commander carrying out a second strike to kill the survivors of a previous strike. White House Press Secretary Caroline Leavitt spent a lot of time at the podium fielding questions about this, you know, as some lawmakers have suggested that that second strike was a war crime. Caroline Leavitt has spent a lot of time defending the legality, saying that Pete Hegseth and the admiral who carried out the strike were acting well within their authority and within the confines of the law.
Kate, we also heard Caroline Leavitt talking about the president's recent MRI. The White House released a memo from the president's physician about that MRI. What do we know about the MRI, and are there any questions that still remain about that?
That's right. So there have been a lot of questions about the president's health. You know, reporters have observed bruising on his hands, observed swelling at his ankles. The White House had previously said that the president had been diagnosed with chronic venous insufficiency. There have been a lot of questions, you know, especially when they announced that Trump had received an MRI, but then did not really answer follow-up questions about why he received that MRI. So today we got more details. The president's doctor said that it was that the president it was preventative and perfectly normal. But there are certainly still questions, especially given the president's age and you know, surrounding all these questions. We've observed the president also sort of dozing off and closing his eyes in recent meetings. So I would say there are definitely questions still remain.
Kate, thank you so much. Bloomberg's Kate Sullivan with us live from the White House, joining us now with his reaction to all of this from Capitol Hill, Republican Congressman Tim Burchett of Tennessee, a member of both the House Foreign Affairs Committee and the House Oversight Committee. It's great to see you, Congressman. Welcome back to Bloomberg TV and radio. I'm wondering what your thoughts are about what's happening in the Caribbean. We've talked about this a bit. Now that we've had a full-fledged conversation and the president's national security team in the Oval Office talking about this, do you believe that we're on the march to war?
I don't think so. I think that, I mean, President Trump is unpredictable in this, and that's really his strength in all this, because these foreign dictators are thinking, well, is he going to do something or is he not? But I think President Trump understands one thing more than most presidents have in the past, that outside of our military strength, our economic strength is where it's at. And I believe that's the cards he usually deals when he's talking to these, especially these third world dictators, because a lot of them are hanging on by a string. And you know, as far as the drug running and everything else goes, look, we've lost more people to just fentanyl deaths than we have to the Vietnam War, for goodness sake. So my state has been ravaged by drugs. I know people personally who've lost loved ones to drug abuse, and anything we can do to stop it is well within that's within our reach. I think we ought to pursue that.
Congressman, there are reports that one of the boat strikes didn't initially kill all the people on board, and then there was an order for a second strike to kind of kill the remaining people who survived. Many experts are saying that's a clear violation of existing frameworks for both U.S. and international law. The Senate Armed Services Committee is already deliberating over holding hearings. Do you foresee the Oversight Committee taking up this issue?
Ma'am, I'm sure we'll have multiple hearings on this, but as usual, Congress under either party doesn't do a whole heck of a lot. We'll probably write somebody a strong letter, and we'll bring some people in, and both sides will pair up against each other. But the reality is Congress isn't going to do anything. This is another bright, shiny object. We'll get distracted on it, as we have in the past, off of other issues, and then we'll move on to the next bright, shiny object that'll get clickbait. And that's what really it's all about.
Wow. Well, that's sad, but I know you're speaking from the heart on that one, Congressman. We are going to see investigations, at least in the Armed Services Committees, on the House side and the Senate side. I talked earlier today with retired General Wesley Clark, who didn't jump headfirst into this, but seemed to think that there was the possibility of a war crime being held here. Here's how he put it.
I'm not a lawyer, so these things are always under law, but all of us in the armed forces were told there are obvious crimes that you don't do, no matter who says to do it. You don't shoot a prisoner. You don't kill unarmed civilians. And so these people were basically no threat to the United States. Their mission was finished with the destruction of the boat. So they sort of fall in the category of people who were no threat, and they shouldn't have been killed. Yeah, it looks like a war crime, prima facie.
Do you agree with that, Congressman?
Well, I appreciate General Clark's service to our country, but technically we're not at war. And those people were, I'm sure they would be right on the next boat bringing drugs back over to kill Americans. So I guess I disagree with him on both those counts because of just the pure definition of war. Congress has not declared war. We probably should. But I'll tell you one thing, our rules of engagement, my father was in the Second World War. If they'd had those rules of engagement then, my dad would still be over in the Pacific on those islands fighting in the Marine Corps, fighting the Japanese. So, you know, I think it's a different day, and I think we should start taking these drug dealers serious. That's all they understand is death and destruction, and they got a little dealt to them. And I'm sure the next group that comes out there that's going to load up one of those boats with coke or whatever they're bringing in will think twice about it.
Yeah, we'd love to know what they're bringing in. What do you make of this pardon of a convicted drug trafficker, Juan Orlando Hernandez, former Honduran leader who a U.S. jury found to be facilitating mass shipments of cocaine to Americans? Should he have been pardoned?
I don't know enough about it. Of course, on the surface, I don't like it. But again, I don't know what's going on with it. I don't know what he traded off. I don't know if he spilled the beans on the pipeline or whatever, and if he had, in effect, had stopped it. So I don't know what he gets for that. There again, I'm sure we'll have some wonderful hearings, and you all can cover it in about 3 or 4 weeks, and we'll deal with it then. But again, I don't expect too much from it, honestly, as much as we should. Look, I'm as frustrated with either party up here, brother. I've been here 8 years, and I'd like to see us do something for the American people, and both sides need to kind of cool it so we can get something done. But it's just going to be the finger pointing back and forth, and I don't know that we'll ever get to anything. I know I should be up here bright and cheery after Thanksgiving, but maybe I'm still on that turkey coma.
Congressman, we want to pivot a little bit and talk about the race in Tennessee's 7th District. A tight race there, surprisingly, with the Republican Matt Van Epps and Democrat Afton Bain. If it does end up being a close election, does that signal trouble for your party?
Well, I don't think it really does, ma'am, because it's an off-election year, and I think what it just signals is just the natural apathy that American voters have right now. We'll probably have 12%. And here I come from an evangelical Christian community or background, and probably 45% of evangelical Christians will go to the polls, maybe 30% of gun owners. I happen to fall into both those categories. I was with Matt this morning. I got up around 4 o'clock to get on the road to Middle Tennessee, and I flew out of Nashville to get here this afternoon, so I'm a little weary from it. But it's going to be a close race. We're going to have bad weather. And generally, the Democrats will vote in early voting. Republicans like to go on election day. I'm sort of from that too, but I wish people would just go early and get it in the bank, because you never know what's going to happen in East Tennessee or in Middle Tennessee anyway. I mean, you don't like the weather. Wait 30 minutes, it'll change. So it could be. And you know the Democrats are pumping tons of money in it, whether it's dark money, Soros-esque, whatever it is. Kamala Harris comes in, Al Gore and AOC are on today. But you have to realize what I've told people is that the opposition is not somebody from out of town. Everybody always says, oh, these New Yorkers, these Chicago, L.A., coming in and changing the political makeup. She was educated in Knoxville, Tennessee, and she is very far to the left. But the reality is, ma'am, all she's doing is speaking the language of what Congress is saying from behind closed doors. The Democrat Party is not, it sure as heck isn't Harry Truman's Democrat Party. I mean, it's not even Bill Clinton's party anymore. It is so far to the left. And this woman that is running, she is private school educated in Knoxville, Tennessee. She represents that. She's talked about tearing down police stations and opening the border and transgender surgery for minors without parental consent, all those things. She even said she doesn't like country music, if you can imagine that, being from Nashville, Tennessee. I asked somebody earlier if was she against Ric Flair, the professional wrestler, or Kid Rock. I mean, these are all Tennessee things, and I think she's very out of touch, but she represents a very vocal, very active group of Tennesseans, and the conservative movement better start paying attention.
Well, she was asked about that this morning, Congressman. She says the country music bit was taken out of context, but we'll see how this plays out. Yeah. And we'd love your read on the results of this race. Republican Congressman Tim Burchett of Tennessee, we thank you. President Trump said she despised country music. Coming up, NVIDIA has invested a couple of $2 billion in Synopsys with the goal of infusing its AI computing technology into more industries. We'll bring you details on that. Also, President Trump says he's made his decision regarding the next Fed chair. We'll discuss next with Brookings Institute Senior Fellow, Managing Partner at International Capital Strategies. Doug Rediker is with us, only on Balance of Power on Bloomberg TV and radio.
Is the low-income consumer in particular, which has been hardest hit by higher interest rates.
The consumer is becoming more kind of selective and careful in terms of where they're choosing to spend.
They're saying they're going to try to take advantage more of promotions, more of Black Friday sales, and this might mean that we saw some of this increase that you saw right now in Black Friday sales is consumers pulling forward some of their holiday spending to take advantage of sales and promotions.
It's Balance of Power on Bloomberg TV and radio. Alongside Amara Amokwe, I'm Joe Matthew. Those were analysis this morning on Bloomberg. Analysts responding to this year's Black Friday data, which showed in-store sales rising and lifting hope for a solid U.S. holiday shopping season. However, the crypto downturn today nearly wiped out $1 billion in levered bets, with Bitcoin sliding as much as 8%. Everyone's waiting for the seasonality, for the Santa Claus rally, for the year-end melt-up. And for a closer look at what markets did today, we turn to power moves with Bloomberg's Romaine Bostick, who joins us live from World Headquarters in New York. December's here, Romaine. What happened?
Yeah, you might have to wait a little bit longer for that Santa Claus rally, Joe. Sentiment has actually been dour. It's been dour, really, for pretty much the entire month of November, despite the fact that we did have a little bit of a rally into the end of that month. But that rally was largely technical, not fundamental. And when investors came back to work on this Monday morning, it was all about the fundamentals, corporate fundamentals, as well, of course, as economic fundamentals, and they did not like what they saw. You did see a sell-off in a lot of the discretionary names, despite the fact that this is the holiday shopping season, and you saw a sell-off in some of the high-value tech names. Now, that could change in a big way, particularly next week, once we get the Fed meeting out of the way and get a better sense on how the Fed is actually going to approach things. But sentiment has been shifting, and you saw that really reflected in the continued drop in Bitcoin. In fact, the crypto space has really had the earth quaking below it for quite some time, really about 3 months now. A break below 84,000 earlier in the session for Bitcoin. And that seems to be this sense here that at least when it comes to the most speculative parts of this market, a lot of folks have either cashed in their chips or just simply moved to the sidelines, Joe. And that raises the big question here about what does become the next catalyst for it. Is it the AI trade? Well, some people would say, yeah, you did see a little bit of strength in names like NVIDIA today, in names like Apple, as those companies continue to invest in the AI space and, more importantly, continue to show that they still have profitability and continue to have top-line revenue growth. And that could be the story for the month of December. And for some folks, Joe, that could be the story for 2026.
All right, Romaine. We've got 1 month to go. Bloomberg's Romaine Bostick, we thank you with Power Moves. Meantime, President Trump says he has made his choice, deciding on his pick to lead the Federal Reserve next year, after making clear that he expects his nominee to deliver interest rate cuts. He's just not telling us who it is. The president talking to reporters on his way back to the White House last night. Listen.
New Fed chair, are you any closer on that right now?
I know who I'm going to pick. Yeah.
Oh, tell us. Kevin Hasset.
I'm not telling you.
The president's comments coming just days after Bloomberg News reported people within Trump's inner circle see White House Economic Council Director Kevin Hasset as the likely choice to succeed Jay Powell. He's said to be at the top of the list. And joining us now for more, Doug Rediker is back with us, managing partner at International Capital Strategies. Mr. Rediker, it's great to see you. I hope you had a great Thanksgiving. If he's in fact at the top of the list and the president's made up his mind, what are we waiting for?
Well, it's interesting because in anticipation of coming on today, I reached out to a number of asset managers, hedge funds, broad-based investors, and it was almost split. Half of them said, well, it was floated last week and the markets reacted well, so this has been fully digested and nothing to see here. The other half had exactly the opposite reaction. And they actually said, you know, we are very worried about Fed independence. We are very worried about our chairman, Hasset, and what it could mean to the integrity of the decision-making process, particularly on monetary policy at the Fed. And so if that goes down that route, we expect there to be a real negative reaction from the markets. So you can pick. What are we waiting for? I think President Trump is probably hearing this as well, probably not from Hasset. He's probably saying, oh, it's all good. But it is still unclear to me, certainly, which way it's going to go. I think that there's a lot of uncertainty baked into the Kevin Hasset pick if he goes that way. So that's where I come out.
Doug, what is giving people heartburn potentially about Kevin Hasset? He used to work at the Fed. He has a long track record in economics. What exactly is the concern when it comes to the question of Fed independence?
So I think on paper, Kevin Hasset is the ideal choice for President Trump. He's not only served in both Trump administrations, but he is a long-standing inside the Beltway figure. We've all known him for 20-plus years. He's establishment. You can agree with him or disagree with him, but he was well between the 40-yard lines on the field. There's now a sense that Kevin Hasset is the one who has sold some of that credibility and integrity and independence to be Donald Trump's person. And so if you look at the people who served in Trump 1 and Trump 2, there are not that many, and Kevin Hasset is one of them. I mean, Peter Navarro is the other. I'm not lumping Kevin Hasset with Peter Navarro, but you do get a sense that there's a select few that managed to make the grade in 1 and 2 of the Trump terms. So I think the concern is Kevin Hasset as Fed chair is not the Kevin Hasset of ex-Fed staff, well-known, basic establishment economist. It is doing Trump's bidding. And in that context, the whole Fed independence thing comes into play. Fed chair doesn't have to be the smartest economist in the room. They have to be able to drive consensus. And the question is, do we end up with a Fed and an FOMC that basically are divided not on different macroeconomic viewpoint lines, but on the lines of those who are willing to be politicized and those who are not. And that is what I think the markets are worried about.
I'm glad you brought up the question of consensus because we're seeing Fed Chair Jerome Powell already having more difficulty forging consensus right now. We're seeing policymakers with a lot of diverging views. If Kevin Hasset is the pick, will he even be able to deliver the rate cuts that President Trump so wants?
Well, that's what I was saying. So to some degree, if you need a majority of the FOMC, and Kevin Hasset is not necessarily going to be a consensus builder. He might be, but the question is, will he be? And we don't know. So can he make the arguments that take those that are maybe not so sure and actually bring them to his side? Or are they going to say, you know what, Chairman Hasset, I hear you, but I don't think you're making the arguments for the right reasons, so I'm going to vote against. We don't know how that's going to play out, but that uncertainty is why there is this bifurcation of those who are saying, nothing to see here, and those that are overly troubled by it.
It gets back to your remark about driving consensus. What happens on the Hill? What's this confirmation hearing like if it's Kevin Hasset? They all know each other.
Yeah, I've been thinking about that. I think, first of all, in the early days of this Trump term, he got great deference, right? Even, Senator Cassidy voted for Secretary Kennedy on the basis of, well, the president deserves his choice. I don't think that goodwill is there. That doesn't mean Republicans are going to buck President Trump. I just don't think that they're willing to do his bidding without any question. But I do think that Kevin Hasset has built up enough goodwill over many, many years, and his stature is fine on paper. He's fine. I mean, there's nothing explicitly objectionable. If they ask him, are you going to do what the president asks you to do, even if you think it's the wrong thing? And if he says yes, then he's probably got trouble. But short of that, I don't think he's going to have any trouble getting confirmed.
I'll tell you, in our remaining moment here, the news conferences would be awfully different, right? He's on cable news almost every morning defending the president. What would that be like at 2 o'clock on a Fed day or 2:30 on a Fed day?
Yeah, I think that the one thing that I'm not sure plays to Kevin Hasset's strengths in the Trump selection process is I'm not sure his manner of communicating has had a gravitas that is worthy of what Trump would think is what a Fed chair should look and sound like.
Wow.
That if you go back to Trump 1.0 when he picked Rex Tillerson, the Secretary of State, after meeting him for 5 minutes or something like that, it was because he thought he looked the part. Central casting. And you have to say, relative to Chris Waller, does Kevin Hasset have that same central casting benefit?
This is why we wanted Doug Rediker to come by. Thank you, Doug, for the insights. International Capital Strategies, we thank you. In Washington, I'm Joe Matthew. This is Bloomberg TV and Radio.
I think Russia would like to see it end, and I think I know Ukraine would like to see it end.
You just said that Ukraine has a little bit of problems.
Well, we have a corruption situation going on, which is not helpful.
And is that impeding the peace talks?
I said it was going on for 3 years, right? Didn't I say it? For 3 years I said it, so I was way ahead of schedule. But I think that there's a good chance we can make a deal.
It's Balance of Power on Bloomberg TV and radio. Alongside Amara Omokwe, I'm Joe Matthew. That was the president, of course, speaking on Air Force One yesterday, continuing his push for a peace agreement between Russia and Ukraine as he sends his special envoy, Steve Witkoff, to Moscow this week. He's on his way today. President Trump's comments coming after the U.S. and Ukrainian negotiators also met in Florida for the latest round of talks. Secretary of State Marco Rubio said the teams had productive discussions about a framework for a peace deal, but that there was no final breakthrough. For the latest on these peace negotiations, we bring in Bloomberg's Eric Martin, who covers the State Department and foreign policy for us. Eric, it's great to have you back. Presumably, Steve Witkoff is going to take this agreement to Moscow to try to sell it to Vladimir Putin. Is it still being baked?
Well, Joe, that's the important thing here, right, is that as soon as things tilt more in the direction of one partner or another in this negotiation, the concern is that the other one is being sold out. And so this concern, we saw President Zelensky today meeting with President Macron of France, and also touching base with Steve Witkoff. But looking at the talks yesterday, more than 4 hours that Rubio and Witkoff, Secretary Rubio and Steve Witkoff met with Ukrainian negotiators yesterday in Florida. The concern from Europe being that because Zelensky is facing this corruption scandal at home, and because of the stance that the U.S. has taken earlier or last month now on this 28-point plan, that the U.S. is somehow going to push Ukraine to take something that they otherwise wouldn't have and put the pressure there rather than putting the pressure on the aggressor, Russia, to back off its aggression and abandon any of its positions that it's taken since the invasion in February 2022.
How likely is Ukraine to take a deal that might be a bad deal for them? Do they have any alternatives at this point?
Well, that's the concern, is that in some way the easiest way to end a war is by putting pressure on the weaker country. And if you look from a military standpoint and from an overall capacity standpoint, certainly the expectation coming into the war was that Ukraine would be weaker than Russia. That's turned out not to be the case because for Ukraine, this is an existential fight. They are fighting for their sovereignty, for their land, for their freedom. And so that's a powerful motivator, but still a concern that in the geopolitical sway and in the weighting of things, that things still tilt in Russia's favor as a larger economy with the historically larger military. And so concern that Ukraine is going to be somehow bullied or have its arm twisted into taking something that it otherwise wouldn't have just because the U.S. wants to end the war.
Eric, great reporting, as always. Bloomberg's Eric Martin with us in Washington. Joining us now with his take on these developments is retired Lieutenant Colonel Alexander Vindman, former Director for European Affairs on the National Security Council, now Senior Advisor at Votevets. Lieutenant Colonel, it's good to see you. Welcome back to Bloomberg TV and radio. We have a lot of questions. We can be very specific about some of them, but I want to start broad with you here because we've been talking about every wrinkle in this 28-point, then 20-something point, now 19-point plan. When I just wonder broadly, do you believe that any of this is real, or is Vladimir Putin just trying to slow the clock so he can freeze Ukraine for another winter?
You know, I think we all have lots of questions about this. I've never seen anything quite so chaotic as this iterative process to attempt a peace negotiation. Sometimes it looks reminiscent of shuttle diplomacy. You got some statesmen going between Moscow and Kiev or other capitals. But what you don't have, and what's evident and present in this one, is you don't have folks that have no competence negotiating, folks that don't actually have a formal role in government, like Jared Kushner sitting at a table advising on negotiations. I think he might be there for some sort of business angle or some economic component. But there are, constant questions about what the administration is undertaking. What is clear, though, is that I think everything that we're seeing is pretty much a non-starter for Russia. Why? Because Putin has still not left his maximalist objectives. Just within the past couple of days, he said that he's not going to sign a deal with Zelensky because he doesn't consider Zelensky a legitimate president. He still has maximalist demands on. He wants to see Ukraine as a failed state. Ukraine is obviously not going to accept that. So this 28-point plan that was handed over to Witkoff, potentially just translated from Russian into English and then pressed on the Ukrainians as an ultimatum wasn't even a legitimate plan that was going to get the Russians to sign on and get to the table. It was really a ploy to weaken and undermine Ukraine. Because if you think about it from Russia's perspective, in this scenario, either Russia gets a capitulation, not likely, or it makes Ukraine look like the bad actor and breaks the relationship between Ukraine and the U.S. So none of this looks like a legitimate peace negotiation. It's something else that's less clear.
Yeah. Well, you refer to the potential financial motivations here by this administration, aired out over the weekend on the Wall Street Journal in a story that was headlined, "Make Money, Not War, Trump's Real Plan for Peace in Ukraine." The idea of normalizing economic ties and having an opportunity to start investing in each other's countries is what we're talking about here. Lieutenant Colonel, do you believe that Steve Witkoff has Ukrainians' best interests in mind?
I don't think he has Ukrainians' best interest in mind. I know that President Trump doesn't have Ukraine's best interest in mind. I'm not even sure if Witkoff has Trump's best interest in mind. What you have in this administration are a lot of billionaire personalities that are at times advancing their own costs. There was another article about David Sachs advancing AI policy. This is a bunch of different fiefdoms with various Trump oligarchs kind of fighting for their sliver on how they enrich themselves. In certain ways, frankly, in my view, following on the model of President Trump. You know, he talked about in that audio clip or that video clip about corruption in Ukraine. It ultimately resulted in the removal of the second most powerful person in Ukraine, Andrei Yermak. And that's a huge scandal. It's going to have a huge shakeup on the Ukrainian government. But what we're not really spending enough time talking about is the rampant corruption that the Trump administration is engaged in, whether that's cryptocurrency, kind of self-dealing real estate ventures. What it really is important, though, is how they implicate U.S. national security. In this case, Steve Witkoff is advancing a venture that will allow the U.S. to get access to frozen Russian assets, allow the U.S. to get access to potentially EU assets that are going to be poured into reconstruction, and allow the U.S. and these particular actors to access rare earths, other kind of sweetheart deals in Russia. That is the hook that Putin is using to bring Ukraine, bring pressure on Ukraine, bring the U.S. Negotiating team on side. That's the part that seems clearer to me.
Mm-hmm.
Lieutenant Colonel, just sticking there with the resignation of Andrei Yermak, President Zelensky's chief of staff, could you talk to us a little bit about how you expect that resignation to influence these deal negotiations? And also, do you expect there to be more leadership changes?
I would be surprised if there aren't. I think it's possible that you could still see Yermak exercise informal power. It's a problem with developing democracies. I mean, we kind of see it now with the rollback in our democracy with Jared Kushner exercising informal power. But more than likely, Yermak being his resignation being accepted is going to have a cascade of other resignations and other senior leadership changes. It's going to put some pressure on leadership during this war, decision making during this war. Yermak was kind of a focal point for all the decisions before they filtered up to Zelensky. And he was also central to the negotiations that are occurring, whether it's with the U.S. or kind of indirectly with the Russians. So that's going to, and you have, Umerov, who was formerly the Minister of Defense and now the Secretary of National Defense and Security Council. He's going to be the lead figure there. But it's going to create some problems because Yermak has been a point of continuity and a focal point for so long for the entirety of almost the entirety of Zelensky's administration.
We were talking about how President Zelensky was in Paris today. Could you talk about how some of Ukraine's European allies are positioning themselves in these negotiations?
I think from one standpoint, they know that the endemic corruption in Ukraine is a long-term problem. They're talking, behind the scenes, almost certainly to Zelensky about dealing with these issues. But the face of the European alliance is going to be ironclad support for Ukraine. It's going to be rejecting anything that looks like Russia's wish list, which is what this 28-point plan was. because it puts Europe's security at risk. It puts Russia in a much, much stronger position where it could declare not just a kind of a victory, but position itself for further aggression down the road. So you already have a European plan coming in a way supporting this 19-point plan that Marco Rubio was able to negotiate. That's strangely enough, Marco Rubio is kind of the hero in all this. He's the one guy that's not necessarily looking to make business deals. He's there for national security reasons, and he's going to rationalize an approach that Steve Witkoff and we forgot about J.D. Vance sending his buddy, his law school buddy Driscoll, the Secretary of the Army there, that they have completely different objectives in mind that don't necessarily secure the U.S. or our European relationship. So Marco Rubio is trying to claw back some rationality to this approach. The next step is to go to Moscow, put this in front of Putin. Putin is going to pretty much reject it and say, well, we need to renegotiate these points, and we'll see this particular round crumble and Ukraine suffer through another winter before we maybe have some sort of more rational approach unfold in 2026 after 4 years of war.
Mr. Vindman, there's a big conversation going on right now in Washington, D.C. about possible war crimes. And it's not about Ukraine. It's about what's happening in the Caribbean. I know this may not be an area of specialty geographically speaking for you. We're normally talking about the war in Ukraine. But as someone who's worn the uniform, had the rank of lieutenant colonel, has taken the oath, if you saw this take place where we shot at an alleged drug boat and there were 2 survivors, would you have taken the order to kill them?
Frankly, I feel comfortable talking about this. I've been looking at this developing situation where we're marching towards a war with Venezuela for months. This has been bubbling up for months. It has been deeply disturbing that Hegseth has and the president have authorized these strikes, these extrajudicial murders. I think these are war crimes that are being conducted. In this particular situation, this is one of I believe it was the first strike. The boat was struck, and then what were then non-combatants, no longer a threat.
Right.
These folks were in the water, and Hegseth ordered a reattack to murder these folks. That is blatantly illegal. It looks like there's already a bicameral, bipartisan effort to investigate Hegseth's decision-making year. Today during a press conference, Carolyn Leavitt mentioned that this event occurred. She just denied that Hegseth actually ordered this. I think an investigation is going to reveal whether SOCOM, JSOC, Joint Special Operation Command, acted independently or acted on orders of Hegseth. I actually know some of these folks, including the top leadership there. I'd be shocked if they took this action without explicit orders from Hegseth. I think Hegseth is committed a war crime.
Thanks for being with us, sir, and for answering that question. Retired Lieutenant Colonel Alexander Vindman, we thank you. Coming up on Balance of Power, another Trump prosecutor, this time in New Jersey, is deemed illegitimately in office. Why? After the break. And the Tennessee special election tomorrow, getting national attention. Could it end in a Republican upset, or will Democrats see their blue wave hit a wall? We'll dive into it with our political panel next on Balance of Power on Bloomberg TV and radio. This is Balance of Power on Bloomberg TV and radio. Alongside Amara Omokwe, I'm Joe Matthew. We'll have more on the major stories we're following in Washington coming up with our political panel. First, the stories we're watching in today's Power Brief. A federal appeals court has struck down President Trump's appointment of Alina Habba to be the top U.S. prosecutor in New Jersey, saying Trump's former personal attorney remains disqualified from serving after a lower court found her appointment unlawful. Habba was initially appointed as interim U.S. attorney at the end of March, with her 4-year nomination being rejected by both of New Jersey's senators. It's seen as yet another hurdle in the Trump administration's attempts to place loyalists in top federal attorney positions without congressional approval. Just last week, a federal judge threw out criminal charges against James Comey and Letitia James, ruling the prosecutor in the case, Lindsay Halligan, had been illegally appointed. President Trump is getting more involved in a special congressional election set for tomorrow in Tennessee, taking part in 2 rallies today for the Republican candidate Matt Van Epps. Trump calling into the first rally that took place this morning, at which Speaker Mike Johnson held his phone up to a microphone. The two will appear together at a separate rally this evening. This after the president posted on social media that Epps' opponent, Democratic State Senator Afton Bain, hates Christianity and openly disdains country music. The district includes parts of Nashville. President Trump won it by 22 points in the last election. Joining us now with their reaction to all the news out of Washington today and Tennessee, Bloomberg Politics contributors Rick Davis, partner at Stone Court Capital, our Republican strategist, alongside Democratic analyst Jeannie Sheehan Zaino, democracy visiting fellow at Harvard Kennedy School's Ash Center. Great to see you both. Everyone survived Thanksgiving, and we're back to business today in Washington. Rick, this comes with accusations of war crimes following this report in the Washington Post that the Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth made a kill everyone order about these vessels. We were just talking to Alexander Vindman about this. A couple of guys were left in the drink, and we went back around and killed them. If that is found to be the case, they're talking about it reportedly in the Oval Office right now. What is this administration facing?
Yeah, look, it could be a very important meeting happening in the White House right now because it could decide the fate of the Secretary of War. Pete Hegseth is responsible for everything that happens inside the Pentagon. All our warfighters, our commanders in the field, they report to him. And so regardless of whether he gave this order or the order was given by the SOCOM commander, the SOUTHCOM commander, who was overseeing the activity, it's his responsibility. And this administration has not been big about taking responsibility at the top, so it may not, that rule may not apply. But it's pretty clear based on what the White House did today, which is completely flipped on the idea that, you know, an order had been given, is going to have to deal with accountability now. And, you know, in the past, that accountability would have gone up to the Secretary of Defense.
Jeannie, at the same time that the administration is defending these boat strikes, President Trump said he also plans to pardon former Honduran President Hernandez, who was serving a long prison sentence because of drug trafficking. I wonder, is the administration's message on combating drug trafficking, does it square when the president is pardoning this president and also doing these boat strikes?
Yeah, it's such an important question because I think this is what the meeting Rick talked about. If they are truly deciding on the future of Pete Hegseth, that is one thing. But if they are deciding on the U.S.'s approach to Venezuela, they have a big problem. And, you know, this pardon speaks to it. What we have understood from the administration so far is that we are engaged with Venezuela in the way we have been to combat drug trafficking. It doesn't add up for people who know about what is coming out of Venezuela. But if you accept that, then why does he go ahead and pardon this ex-president of Honduras, who is known as a major drug trafficker serving 45 years? And this is going to be important because if the president decides that he is going to engage in regime change in Venezuela, he's going to have to convince people in the American public as to why. If they're going to talk about drug trafficking and combating it, how does that square with what he did? And the latest CBS poll shows 3/4 of Americans don't want to go to war in Venezuela and don't understand the why. So if they decide to go ahead with this, they've got their work cut out for them on this score.
Rick, when you hear House Armed Services, Senate Armed Services both pursuing investigations into this, it starts to sound pretty real. How far are Senate Republicans willing to dig in when it comes to this White House?
Well, amongst the Republicans, there's been a lot of discomfort around the approach to these attacks on drug vessels coming out of Venezuela. Since the first one months ago, Republicans have been concerned that, you know, we're going beyond the normal rules of engagement that you would have in interdicting drugs to the United States. And so this just really highlights a lot of that anxiety on Capitol Hill, not just with Republicans, but with Democrats, too. But how much of that is partisan, we'll never really know. But Republicans are at the point now where I think you're seeing more and more Republicans, especially the leadership in the House of Representatives, leadership in the Foreign Relations Committee, the Intelligence Committee, the Defense Committee, really start to speak out about the fact that they don't like this policy and they're going to oppose it.
What do you think the administration's endgame here is ultimately? Do you see any chance for negotiations with Venezuela?
Look, I think that the president had a conversation with Maduro. He is a unelected, illegitimate president. He needs to go. If that was a conversation that said, hey, what are the terms to get you out of the country? I think that would be productive. Nobody wants to see bloodshed. Nobody wants to see the U.S. use force. But I don't think it's actually a particularly bad thing to be putting a lot of pressure on a guy who has undermined the rule of law, undermined the democracy that used to flourish in Venezuela, upsets the balance of power in Latin America. He's a bad guy and he ought to go. And if the Russians want to take him, we ought to give him to him.
We heard from the doctor today. This is something that came up last evening on Air Force One, along with the drug boat strikes. That's the president's health and why he had an MRI. Reporters asked him at the back of the jet last evening, and he wasn't able to say what body part that the doctor was looking at. Let's go back to Air Force One last evening. Here's the president.
If you want to have it released, I'll release it.
Please, can you tell us what they were looking at?
For what, releasing?
No. What part of your body was the MRI looking at?
I have no idea. It was just an MRI. What part of the body? It wasn't the brain because I took a cognitive test and I aced it. I got a perfect mark, which you would be incapable of doing.
It wasn't the brain, Jeannie. It was the heart. Like a sequel to The Wizard of Oz here with President Trump. The doctor says that his cardiovascular health is sound and there's nothing to worry about here. Do we think the president really went into that MRI not knowing why?
It is hard to believe, but I would just note when he made that comment, once again attacking a female reporter, which he has done repeatedly since he got back in the White House. And also, why did this all start? Because he decided to use a wildly inappropriate slur on Thanksgiving night to describe the governor of Minnesota, something that even a Republican state senator in Indiana took exception to, as his daughter has Down syndrome, and decided as a result he was not going to support the president redistricting in Indiana. So even if the president's mental acuity is great, what is not great is his use of the English language and the dignity he should bring to the White House and in his interactions with reporters and all the rest of us. I take exception to that, Joe Matthew.
Wow. Well, I get that, Jeannie. That you just connected a lot of dots there. The president, by the way, when asked about this, Rick, did not apologize for using the R word and didn't even seem to realize that that was a problem. He just can't seem to get through these conversations without disparaging a female reporter.
Yeah, he's living into the lowest common denominator these days, and I don't know if that's an age thing. He's turning 80. Unfortunately, a lot of my colleagues who are that age tend to lose the V chip, and so maybe he's suffering from some of that. But I suspect it's more to come.
There it is, from Rick Davis and Jeannie Shanzano, back together again. Great to have you both with us as we encourage you, as ever, to check out the Washington Edition newsletter on the terminal and online. Thanks for joining us on Balance of Power. This is Bloomberg.